You know that person in your life who never posts anything. No selfies, no vacation shots, no stories, no updates. Their profile picture might be 3 years old, maybe 5. Maybe it's not even a photo of them. And every time you check, nothing. It's like they vanished from the internet entirely. And in a world where everyone else is sharing everything, you've probably wondered about that person. Are they okay? Are they lonely? Are they just bad at social media? Here's the thing. Psychology suggests something very different is going on, and it might completely change how you see them. Today, we're breaking down the psychology of people who never post photos online. And if you're one of these people, if you've ever felt like you had to explain or defend why your feed is empty, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not antisocial, you're not hiding, and you are definitely not broken. What you are is psychologically fascinating, because the research behind this behavior points to something most people don't expect. It points to emotional maturity, a stable sense of self, and a kind of inner security that doesn't need a single like to stay intact. Now let's be honest about the pressure. We live in a culture that treats visibility as currency. If you didn't post it, it didn't happen. If you don't share it, people assume you don't have anything worth sharing. That's the unspoken rule, and most of us absorbed it without even realizing it. So when someone opts out of that system entirely, it can look strange. It can look like they're struggling or disconnected. But there's a psychological framework that explains why the opposite is usually true. And it starts with something researchers call privacy orientation. Privacy orientation is not the same thing as social avoidance. Let me make that distinction clear because it matters. Social avoidance is driven by anxiety, by fear of judgment, by a desire to escape uncomfortable situations. Privacy orientation is different. It's a stable personality trait where someone actively chooses to control how much of themselves they reveal to the world. Researchers Aaron and Aaron, in their 1997 work on sensory processing sensitivity published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, identified that people who are highly attuned to their environment, people who process stimuli more deeply, tend to be far more selective about what they share and with whom. This isn't withdrawal, this is discernment. And there's a critical difference between someone who can't connect and someone who simply chooses not to perform connection for an audience. People high in privacy orientation don't need the feedback loop. They don't post a photo and then check back 14 times to see how many likes it got. Their sense of self doesn't depend on that cycle. They validate internally. And that kind of self-sufficiency is a marker of inner security, not isolation. Sound familiar? Stay with me, because the next piece explains why this runs even deeper than you think. The second psychological pattern that shows up in people who rarely post is something called self-concept clarity. This term comes from research by Campbell and colleagues, published in 1996 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Self-concept clarity refers to how clearly and consistently you understand who you are. People with high self-concept clarity have a stable internal sense of identity. They don't swing between versions of themselves depending on who's watching. They know what they value, what they believe, and what kind of person they are, and that knowledge doesn't shift when the social winds change. Now here's where it connects. Research consistently shows that people who share less online tend to score higher in self-concept clarity. Why? Because they're not using social media as a mirror. They're not posting a photo and then waiting to see how people react to decide whether it was good enough. They're not chasing trends to stay relevant or curating an identity based on what gets engagement. Their self-image is internally generated, not crowdsourced. And when your identity doesn't depend on external feedback, you simply don't need to participate in that cycle. Your happiness isn't attached to how your life appears to others. It's attached to how your life actually feels to you. That's not avoidance, that's clarity. Now let me take this a step further, because there's a specific type of confidence that psychologists associate with low posting behavior, and it's probably not what you'd guess. Psychologist Michael Kernis introduced a distinction in 2003 that changes everything about how we understand self-esteem. He separated self-esteem into 2 categories. The first is contingent self-esteem, which rises and falls based on external validation. You get a compliment, you feel great. You get ignored, you spiral. The second is secure self-esteem. This type doesn't require external input to remain stable. It's just there, quiet, consistent, Not arrogant, not fragile, just steady. People with secure self-esteem don't need applause to feel confident. They don't need 100 likes to believe they look good. They don't need someone to comment on their dinner to enjoy the meal. And this is exactly the profile that shows up in people who rarely or never post. Their confidence doesn't fluctuate with social feedback because it was never built on social feedback in the first place. Kernis associated secure self-esteem with lower anxiety, reduced approval-seeking behavior, and a stronger focus on real-world goals rather than performative ones. Think about that for a second. The person who never posts might not be the one struggling with confidence. They might be the one who figured it out. While everyone else is on a roller coaster of likes and comments and validation cycles, this person stepped off the ride entirely. Not because they couldn't handle it, but because they didn't need it. And there's still another layer here that most people miss entirely. Psychologists DC and Ryan, through their work on self-determination theory, introduced a concept called internal locus of evaluation. This is the cognitive habit of judging yourself by your own standards rather than external benchmarks. People with a strong internal locus of evaluation don't ask whether their life looks impressive from the outside. They ask whether it feels meaningful from the inside. They tend to be more introspective, more deliberate in their communication, and more selective about where they invest their energy. They prefer depth over breadth in their relationships and interactions. When these people do share something, it's because it genuinely matters to them, not because the algorithm rewards consistency. They're not performing authenticity. They are authentic. And in a digital landscape where everyone is trying to look like they're not trying, that kind of quiet genuineness is rare. This also explains something you might have noticed. When these people do speak up, when they do share something, it tends to carry weight. People listen. Because there's an unspoken trust that comes with someone who doesn't broadcast everything. You know that when they finally say something, they mean it. That selectivity isn't silence, it's precision. Here's one more piece that ties all of this together, and it might be the most important one. Back in 1954, psychologist Leon Festinger introduced social comparison theory, the idea that humans naturally evaluate themselves by comparing to others. It was an adaptive trait, useful for survival in small groups. But social media turned that instinct into something it was never designed to handle. Instead of comparing yourself to 15 people in your village, you're now comparing yourself to thousands of curated highlight reels every single day. And your brain can't tell the difference between a real representation of someone's life and a carefully edited one. It processes all of it as real. Researchers like Jean Twenge and Keith Campbell have documented how this constant exposure to idealized self-presentation fuels anxiety, erodes self-esteem, and creates a cycle of approval, seeking that feeds on itself. The more you post, the more you need to be seen. The more you're seen, the more your identity becomes tied to being seen. It's a loop. People who don't post, many of them understand this loop intuitively. They've looked at the system and recognized what it actually does, not consciously sitting down and analyzing social comparison theory, but feeling it, sensing that something about the scroll, the comparison, the performance doesn't sit right. And rather than fighting the current, they simply stepped out of the river. That's not weakness. That's not technophobia. That's a deliberate choice to protect their psychological baseline. They chose peace over performance, and that takes more awareness than most people give them credit for. When you put all 5 of these traits together, a pattern emerges. Privacy orientation, self-concept clarity, secure self-esteem, internal locus of evaluation, awareness of social comparison dynamics. These aren't 5 random traits, they're a system. They work together like an internal architecture that allows someone to move through the world without needing constant external reinforcement. Each trait strengthens the others. Privacy orientation protects the clarity. Clarity stabilizes the self-esteem. Secure self-esteem supports the internal locus. And the awareness of comparison keeps the whole system intact by removing the loudest source of psychological noise in modern life. This isn't someone who's missing out. This is someone who's opted in to something different, something quieter, something that most of the world is too busy performing to even notice exists. You're not disconnected. You're not invisible. You're operating on a frequency that doesn't need amplification. So the next time you think about that person in your life who never posts, the friend with the empty feed, the coworker you can never find online, the family member who hasn't updated their profile in years, consider the possibility that they're not struggling, they're not hiding from the world. They simply don't need an audience to know who they are. And in a culture that constantly asks you to prove your life is worth watching, that might be the most psychologically grounded thing a person can do. The quietest person in the room isn't always the one with the least to say. Sometimes they're the one who's already said it to themselves and didn't need anyone else to hear it. If this changed how you think about someone you know, or maybe how you think about yourself, hit subscribe. This is where we decode the psychology behind everyday behavior. Not just what people do, but why they do it. And the answers are almost never what you'd expect.